Gemara tells us in Shuas that Moshe Rabbeinu, in terms of his status was he was Melech. He was the king of Klal Yisrael. Aaron was the Kohen, he was the Melech. The law is that anybody who defies a king or does anything which is contrary to the will of the king, although under normal circumstances doesn't carry the death penalty, but if you defy the word of a king has a right to take that person's life. But it's the king's prerogative. The king says to a person, when you come to see me, you should wear a green tie, and he wears a blue tie. If the king chooses to kill him, he has a right to put him to death because he defied the word of the king. We find that does not be from the very beginning. From the time that Moshe had gone out from the palace and he saw the Egyptian beating the Jew, and he kills the Egyptian, the next day he sees these two people arguing and fighting, and he intervenes and he reprimands them for being involved in this type of fight. So they say to him, Omer, do you mean to say you're going to kill us the way you killed the Egyptian? So immediately Moshe says, I see that it became known that I killed the Egyptian because initially he hid him in the sand. He thought nobody was aware of it. And as a result of that, he had to flee from Egypt. And he only returned when he was 80 years old. So Dosan Aviram, knowing that the only advocate Klal Yisrael had in the palace was Moshe, and Moshe was beloved, as it says in the Midrash, to Paro. He was his adopted grandson, and he's a Jew, and Paro knew he was a Jew. I mean, how do you go and inform on Moshe for killing an Egyptian because he had actually raped this Jew's wife, and that's why he was beating him to death? Do you inform on a fellow Jew who's so important to the destiny of the Jewish people, to their present predicament? So what kind of people are these people? And Moshe has to flee. He comes back when he's 80 years old. Hashem says to Moshe, Mesu anoshim, asher bikshu es nafshecha. The people who originally wanted to take your life, they're no longer alive. And he comes back, and Chazal tell us, from here we learned that only Choshev Kimes, because actually Dosan Aviram were well and alive until they finally went down with the Adas Korach. They were swallowed by the earth. So the question is, Moshe, and continuously from that time onward, even now we read at the end of Parsha Shmos, Moshe and Aaron were going into Paro, and they meet the Nogsim, the overseers of the Jews, coming out, and they say to Moshe, Yishbor Hashem beini v'necha, God should judge between us. Until you've come, our relationship with the king, with the government was tolerable. Now, it's not survival anymore. They've decreed that now we have to gather our own straw to make the bricks, and they're demanding the same quotas. You're at fault. As a result of that, what does Moshe go do? He goes and he says to Hashem, why did you bring this hardship upon the people? Why did you send me to be your agent? And because of that, what happens? Hashem says, Ad Totiria, now you will see the redemption. And the inference of now you will see means, but the future entry into the land you're not going to see. Because you spoke out of turn by saying, why did you bring this hardship on the people? Therefore, you will not see, you will pass away in the desert, you're not going into Canaan. And continuously, the Mon does a virum, or continuously a thorn in Moshe's side, continuously. Why did Moshe take him out? Should have put them to death, especially when he came back. Why did he put them to death? And continuously, whenever they tried to topple the apple cart, should have put them to death, but yet he tolerated them. The question is why? That's a question we've asked in the past. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you were able to go back, he made one notion that since they've actually been impoverished, because the only reason why they were able to inform on him initially is because they had tremendous wealth. They had certain connections in the government, the upper echelons of the government. Therefore, they had access to them. Therefore, they're able to inform. But now that they've lost all their wealth, they no longer could go and create that problem for Moshe Rabbeinu. They can't inform on the government on Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, you have nothing to worry about. But otherwise, there'd be a problem. Now the question is, if they are truly deserving to be taken out, why did Hashem give them his financial reversal to protect Moshe Rabbeinu? If they truly deserve to die, he should have taken their lives. But Mesa Noshim, he says to Moshe Rabbeinu, they're alive, but they no longer have the ability to put your life into jeopardy. They no longer have the ability because he'll take their lives. But Hashem did not take their lives. So what was the takeaway that Moshe had from Hashem? God does not want them dead. Clear. Because if he wanted them to no longer be alive, he would have taken their lives. That's Moshe's takeaway. Regardless of how evil they are and how they are always creating very severe, serious complications, tolerate them, keep them alive. Don't kill them. Therefore, whatever happened going forward, Moshe Rabbeinu, he swallowed. And he swallowed and swallowed until finally came to Adas Korach. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Dosa Aviram, as it says, were actually the instigators. They instigated Korach to against Moshe. When that happened, and therefore was an affront to Hashem at that point, Moshe said, let the earth open its mouth, swallow them up, and that was the end of the story. But until then, he tolerated them. And who took them at the end? Not Moshe. Hashem took them at the end. But Tifta Oretz Espriya, the earth opened its mouth, and they were gone, together with Korach. But the takeaway was from Hashem. When Hashem said Mesa Anoshim, it didn't mean they actually died, but rather they had the financial reversal. That's why he did not take them out. Although here, the reason why Moshe spoke out of turn was because they ruffled his feathers. And it says explicitly, only because they ruffled his feathers, but they said, Yishbar Hashem Necho, and they came with this direct claim against Moshe Rabbeinu. Since you've come, things have gotten worse. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu was agitated, and therefore he lost clarity and he spoke out of turn. And as a result of that, he didn't go to Eretz Yisrael for this reason. And he understood what the consequence was. Swallowed it. Because Hashem says, the takeaway is swallowed it. As Hashem did not take them out, you don't take them out. Now, but the question is why? See, you could say, because, we have Russia B'Tovlo. Why is Russia B'Tovlo? Because if the Russia be Ralo and the Tzaddik's Tovlo always, everybody's going to be a Tzaddik. So it's not so simple. There's no rhyme or reason on a superficial level. We don't understand it. Doesn't Aviram, if they're really that evil, why doesn't Hashem take them out? Why are they able to so-called intimidate Moshe Rabbeinu? Evidently, it's not so simple. Creates all this uncertainty, this confusion. So you'd say that's why Hashem wanted to be alive. That part of the challenge. That part of the challenge for Klal Yisrael. Korach was the most serious challenge for Klal Yisrael. He tried to usurp Moshe's authority, which was put the authenticity of Torah into question. Maybe that's why. That's why he kept just let him alive, because they were the instigators for the Adas Korach, as it's explained. But we once said that we quoted the pasuk in Koheles, Elokim Yivakish Nidov. Hashem always favors the pursuit. And he gave all the examples of the pursuit from the beginning of existence until present day. The ultimate pursuit of who? Klal Yisrael. We are pursued by the nations of the world. We're always the underdog. And when you're pursued, Elokim Yivakish Nidov, that even the Midas Hadin, even the attribute of justice, sees the pursuit in what? In a positive light. Does not prosecute, does not condemn the Nirdov. Klal Yisrael is the Nirdov. Being the Nirdov that quells the midas hadin. Although there's plenty to prosecute, Elokim yivakish nirdaf. Even the Elokim is subdued by the nirdaf as a result of being in a pursuit state, which we explained. But the point is, it says, when Moshe Rabbeinu supplicated Hashem by the Chet Egel, why did Hashem listen to his supplications? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was a nirdaf from Paro after he killed the Egyptian. Therefore, Hashem listened to his supplication, and Klal Yisrael was not destroyed. Now, why was Moshe Rabbeinu a nirdaf? Because two Jews by the name of Nas and Aviram, they informed him. So what? Even though their intent was evil, but what was their ultimate contribution? Despite their evilness, Moshe Rabbeinu was a nirdaf. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was a nirdaf, therefore he had a certain grace with Hashem, that Hashem listened to his tefillah. And no level of prosecution could actually interfere with his tefillah. And because of that, Klal Yisrael was saved. So for the sake of Moshe being a nirdaf, Hashem says, I could take them out. But factually, in a certain way, they have a right to continue. Because they're the cause of Moshe Rabbeinu in the ultimate sense. All the years he was in Midian was because of Dasan Aviram. And only after those years did he return to come back as the Goel and ultimately be the one to supplicate where we could have been destroyed and we were not destroyed. Back in the beginning of, there's a Yalkut at the beginning in Bereshis, the whole challenge of Adam Rishon with Eitz Hadas, because of that challenge, we're still contending with all the issues of existence. Nearly 6,000 years, because he went and he made that mistake. And how it came about, the ancient snake and the Gan Eden seduced Chava with the fruit, and the fruit was so attractive, and this and that. You know, and as a result of that, Adam speaks out of turn. He's considered a Kofu Tova. He says, Modi. You know, Hashem could have prevented all this. Why give him these challenges? If he would have not had the challenge, the world would have reached its level of perfection. And all the Chil Hashem from that day going forward would have never happened. The only reason why there's evil in existence is because Adam failed. That's why there's evil. So all the Chil Hashem, Klal Yisrael, being God's people, that were the underdog, that were continuously pursued and they tried to destroy us because of the Chet, because the Eitz Hadas. He could have prevented it all. So the Medrash answers, cites a pasuk. You know, if you have a choreographer, Hashem, nobody could choreograph the way Hashem. Hashem has his reasons, and he orchestrates the scenarios in a certain way because he wants there should be a certain outcome. Certain outcome. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu, why did he not go into the Eretz Yisrael? Because he had his feathers ruffled by Klal Yisrael when they came with this complaint, where's the water, where's this? And he struck the rock rather than speaking to the rock, because they actually agitated him. He was upset because they spoke in a way which was considered Achil Hashem. You know, Hashem could have prevented it. He could have prevented it, that he should not, he should keep his cool. But Hashem knew that he would lose his cool and strike the rock and should not be able to go in. And it says clearly, if Moshe Rabbeinu would have gone to Eretz Yisrael, the Beis Hamikdash would have been permanent, and we would have achieved perfection. Mashiach would have come. The answer is because it wasn't time for him to come. But why did he not go in? So it says explicitly in the Medrash, we discussed this, that because the Jews sinned with Baal Peor in the desert. And where's Moshe Rabbeinu buried? He's buried opposite Baal Peor. That's where his grave is. So whenever Baal Peor, which was one of the most serious failings of Klal Yisrael, comes to prosecute once a year, and that power comes out of the grave, comes out of the ground, that where the sin took place, Moshe Rabbeinu's grave is opposite And when this prosecuting force sees Moshe Rabbeinu's grave, it goes right back into the ground. So to quell that prosecution for the sake of the survival of Klal Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu could not go into Eretz Yisrael. But there has to be a reason. So Hashem gave him a challenge, which he knew he would fail. But of course, it was his choice. So Klal Yisrael should be able to survive. It's all part of the same thing. Moshe Rabbeinu was a near-dove, because the only one who could supplicate on our behalf was only Moshe Rabbeinu. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a Klal Yisrael. As a result of the Chet Egel. So Hashem is actually choreographing everything. Every event is ultimately to bring about the certain result, because otherwise that result would not be. Understand? Dosa Viram were the grandchildren of Reuven. I mean, why do Reuven? The Gemara quotes a pasuk that there's a Chris Brusa Imasosayim. When we speak, we have to be very careful what we say, because you never know the ramifications of speech. When a person says something negative, like it can bring about disastrous results. Many examples of this in the Gemara. You say something negative, chas v'sholom, something very bad can happen. We find that in regard to interpretations of dreams, that a dream is determined by how it's verbalized, how it's interpreted. The same dream, if it's interpreted positively, it's positive. That same dream, if it has a negative interpretation, chas v'sholom, it could be beyond disastrous. Therefore, a person, if you have a dream and you question whether the dream is positive or negative, you should never verbalize it. Because based on the verbalization, that will determine in what direction that dream will manifest itself. Because there's a brisk crusa mesoasayim, Hashem has a covenant with the lips, with speech. The way you express something, that's the way it is. So the Midrash tells us, and the Chofetz Chaim cites this, how careful you have to be with speech, that when initially Yosef had taken Binyamin, taken Shimon as a hostage, and he says, until you bring your youngest brother, I don't want to see you people again. And they explained to Yaakov they can't go back for more wheat until they bring Binyamin. So Reuven says to his father, I'll give you the guarantee. If I don't bring back Binyamin, you could kill two of my children. That's what Reuven said to his father. So he said, when Yaakov heard this, he says, B'chor Shota, are you a fool? That your children are my children. I'm going to kill my own children? What are you talking about? What kind of guarantee is this? So Yehuda spoke up and says, I give the guarantee that I don't bring him back. I'm willing to put my spiritual asset on the line, everything. I'm willing to forfeit everything if I don't bring him back. And that Yehuda's guarantee was accepted. But because Reuven said, I'm willing, chas v'shalom, to have my two sons killed if I don't bring him back, because of that, there was a dozen of Avira. Because he said that the two sons that are going to be killed ultimately manifests that was dozen of Avira. That's what it says in the Medrash. Therefore, the Chofetz Chaim, he cites this Medrash also, but the Baal HaTurim on location cites this Medrash, this Chazal. Therefore, there was a dozen of Avira. So the whole dozen of Avira came about because he spoke out of turn. Said, you see the way these things go. So why was Moshe a near-dove? Why was he a pursuit? Because he was a dozen Aviram. And why was the dozen Aviram? Because Reuven had spoken out of turn by saying he will kill two of his sons. It's unbelievable how things, they connect themselves. And how Hashem allows things to happen, because ultimately certain things have to happen, because you have to have a Moshe Rabbeinu who's pursued. Therefore, you need these two type of characters. And why did they come on the scene? Because Reuven spoke out of turn. Why the Erev Rav? Why did they ultimately? Why were they part of? Why were they there at Sinai? Why were they there? Why did the Jews sin with the golden calf, with the Chet Egel? Who instigated the Chet Egel? The Erev Rav. So the whole challenge of the Egel was only because of the Erev Rav. Because if you look at the pasuk, the Medrash says, what did they say? Elo Elohecha Yisrael. This is your God, Israel. But if the Jews themselves initiated, it should say Elo Eloheinu Yisrael, not Elokecha, Elohecha. Now, but why did they end up there? How did they arrive? They couldn't leave Egypt unless Moshe gave them the green light. And when Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Lech reit kishichas amcha, go down because your people have become corrupted. So Moshe says to Hashem, why is it amcha? Why is it my people? Why is it not your people? He says, these people are not my people. When the Jews left Egypt, did you ask me permission whether the Erev Rav could accompany the Jews? You could have vetoed it. As much as Paro wanted the Erev Rav to leave with us, you could have stopped it. So it's only because you allowed them to come. That's why there's a chet egel. That's what he says to Moshe Rabbeinu. You understand? So why did Hashem not give Moshe the clarity to avoid them, prevent them from coming? The answer is because there had to be a challenge. What was the challenge? The challenge was the chet egel. Are you going to succeed? Are you going to fail? We did not rise to the occasion. When we were challenged with the Erev Rav, we failed. And therefore the Luchos Rishonos were broken. And therefore there was all this period of time until we had Luchos Shnios. All this came about because Hashem did not intervene and stop Moshe from allowing the Erev Rav to leave Egypt. Okay, I think we're ready to go further. You notice at the time of the burning bush, the snare, when Hashem wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to go to be the Goel, to be the Redeemer, there's a dialogue going on for what? For 7 days. And finally, Hashem gets angry with Moshe Rabbeinu because Hashem had responded to every one of Moshe Rabbeinu's questions. And then he says, after everything's said and done, where he has no reason not to be agreeable, he says, but why don't you let the goal be the one who normally is your representative, which is Aaron. V'yichar af Hashem b'Moshe. If you take a look, the dialogue, every appellation of Hashem during the dialogue, even V'yichar af Hashem b'Moshe, it's Yud Kei Vav Kei. The appellation of Hashem is the Midas HaRachmim. Back and forth. So you'd say, until V'yichar af, okay? Hashem is trying to respond to everything Moshe has, because what was Moshe Rabbeinu's intent? Because it was anivus, it was his humility, because he felt he'd be offending his older brother. Because until now, his older brother was Hashem's spokesman, representative, and now all of a sudden the younger brother rises above the older brother. He felt he'd be offending his older brother. That's the reason why he came up with all these reasons why he was not qualified to be the Goel. Finally, at the end of the day, Hashem responds to every one of his reasons why he's not qualified. You're the most qualified. He says, but why don't you have Aaron be the one? V'yicha af Hashem b'Moshe. Pasuk Yudalid Perek Dalid. Yud Kei Vav Kei. We're talking about the wrath of Hashem is coming upon Moshe. At this moment, Moshe forfeits the kuna. Until now, he was going to be the Kohen. But because he spoke out of turn here, he lost the kuna. Aaron, Achicha, Levi, until now was a Levi. From now on, he's going to be the Kohen. You're not going to be the Kohen. Yud Kei Vav Kei. This is all Midas HaRachmim. This parsha, Va'ero, after Moshe Rabbeinu says, why you bring such hardship upon the people? Why did you choose me to be your agent? Moshe. It's Midas Adin. Midas Adin. And Rashi says the word, it doesn't say Yomer Hashem el Moshe. Yedaber is a formal expression of communication. He spoke. He didn't say to Moshe, he spoke. Speaking is more formal. So Rashi, take a look. Daber Elokim el Moshe, Dibir to Mishpot. Al Shehikshel Daber Loma Haros Lom Hazeh. Because he spoke in a way which was inappropriate. Therefore, by saying Loma Haros Lom Hazeh, he's saying Hashem, that he's causing this hardship, that's called Haraosa. Haraosa. For that, it's like unforgivable. It's unforgivable. Loma Haraosa. Like you'd say, we say that as a person is supposed to acknowledge Hashem for good, we say Shechionu, we say acknowledge Hashem even for what? Something which is tragic. We say Dainu Emes. Chazal said it's a rabbinic bracha. Bracha, it's rabbinic. Why did they legislate when, God forbid, a tragedy happens to a Jew, whether it's losing a family member, one's fortune is lost, which causes tremendous pain to a person. The Gemara says, a person has a ship, all his wealth is on the ship, the ship goes down at sea, he's totally impoverished. Says the bracha dynamis. Why? And the moment a person hears such a thing, what's his dynamis? He acknowledges Hashem being the true judge. What's the reason? Because if a person chas v'sholom, when something tragic happens to a person, and you say, why? It doesn't make sense. You know what you're doing? You're questioning Hashem's justice. Moshe Rabbeinu already. Hashem is tzaddik v'yosher. How did you even have the audacity to see it through a lens? Maybe what Hashem did is not within the line of justice. So the Chazal legislated the moment a person hears something of this nature happening, immediately say dynamis. Hashem is the true judge. There's no iniquity in Hashem's justice. That's the way it is. You can ask every question under the sun. But Rashi says, he said, taking the straw subsidy, here I'm supposed to be the goel. Since I've come, you've created things have become more negative, not more positive. That means you're questioning Hashem's justice. This is iniquity in his justice. This is unforgivable. That's why it's so terrible. That's why, for that reason, he forfeited the right to go into Eretz Yisrael for this reason. Hashem is dynamis. How do you say Lama Rosa Lama? Therefore, it's V'yidaber Elokim. This is the Midas Adin over here. Because of the Midas Adin that he said the word Herosa, that's the reason why he forfeited the right to go in. But why did he say that? So the reason why things, and the Orachaim, they all explain over here, we're meant to be 400 years in Egypt. We're there 210. Why was the time line lessened? Because there's an intensification of what? Of the suffering. Because the Jews had to leave at a certain point. So we had to make it up qualitatively suffering for the quantitative time. To take away the straw subsidy and the Jews suffering to a greater degree, this expedited the timeline that we have to leave sooner. So do you understand the ways of Hashem? So how do you say Lam Ha'Rosa? He could have said a term. Could you explain it to me? Why did it have to be this way? But use the term Ha'Rosa. Rashi uses the words. Dibet Mishwar al Shehikshen L'daber Lama Hikshen L'daber. You use the term Lama Ha'Rosa. Not acceptable. Therefore, it's V'yidaber Elokim. And what does he say? V'yoma Elav Ani Hashem. That you're seeing it through a lens of that this is Ha'Rosa, this is Yud Kei Vav Kei. This is Midas HaRachmim. To be able to get out sooner, to expedite it, that you shouldn't go into the oblivion, this is Midas HaRachmim, that's Yud Kei Vav Kei. What you see as Elokim, what you see as Midas, this is Ha'Rosa, this is Ani Hashem. There's an interesting medrash. Very often, the medrash, Rashi, later, the Sifsachim cites it, says Hashem hardened the heart of Paro. Why did he harden the heart of Paro? After the fifth plague, because at the end of the day, when Hashem destroys Egypt, let's say the Egyptians would have let the Jews out because it was under duress. They couldn't deal with it. It was too overwhelming, the plagues. What would be? But ultimately, why did they let us out? Not because they acknowledged Hashem, because the pain was beyond their capacity. So ultimately, they deserve to be destroyed. But Hashem destroys them in that context. What happens? It's Chil Hashem. How does it look? Here they let him out. They heeded the word of Hashem. He's destroying in either case. You know what Hashem does? We're going to show their true colors. As much as I bring the plagues, Paro is intransient. He's not moving. The Egyptians, their hearts are hardened. They're cruel beyond any understanding. They're going toe to toe with Hashem. As a result of that, where it's obvious why they're being destroyed, now he's ready to destroy them. So there shouldn't be a chil Hashem. Should not be a chil Hashem. That's why it was the Hiksha Hashem is like Paro. So it shouldn't be seen that Hashem, what he does is iniquitable. No, they deserve it. Paro, he thinks he's a deity. God is the omnipotent one, he wipes them out. But here, these guys, the good guys, they let him out. Why are you destroying them? Hashem has to show the world they're not good guys. And that's why they're being destroyed. So the Medrash says something interesting. You know, when the straw, the word was given, no longer straw, you know what happened? The Jews had to go gather the straw. We didn't get straw. You have to go into the Egyptians' fields to gather whatever they had. They needed for the bricks, to make the bricks. You know what the Egyptians did to the Jews? When they trespassed on their property, they came out with clubs and they broke their legs and they smashed their hips. The Jews were literally pounded by the Egyptians. And then suddenly things changed, the plague started. So what did the Egyptians, here these people are slaves. They have to meet quotas of bricks. The government's not giving straw. Where are they supposed to get straw from? So they have to go into the fields. The landowners, they go and pummel the Jews to the point where they're literally breaking their bones. Now the plague started. Let the world see what the Egyptians are. The level of cruelty they have. Otherwise, we would have seen Chil Hashem. Why you bring all these plagues on these Egyptians? They provided straw, despite the fact they were slaves, but still they treated them with, relatively speaking, with kid gloves. But after withdrawing it, this is the way they treat the Jews after everything's said and done. Unacceptable. Now Hashem's ready to destroy them with the plagues. That's the Medrash. Good.
Why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu is not able to contemplate that Hashem might be accelerating the process by intensifying the bondage?
It's actually what he said to him. That's what he said. But why didn't he contemplate? You ask him. We'd said the Medrash says that when he was going with Aaron to see Paro, he met Dasan Aviram. They spoke to him with such directness. They ruffled his feathers. He says, "You're supposed to be the Goel. Since you've come, things have become more difficult for the Jews. The Jews are suffering. You're the culprits." So that comment to Moshe threw him off. As a result of that, he spoke out of turn. Of course, it was a challenge. He could have controlled himself, but because of that interchange between Dasan Aviram and Moshe, that's why he spoke out of turn. You're right. A person only thinks rationally if he's in a calm, tranquil state. But if you're in an agitated state, and evidently they touched a raw nerve in him, and like by when the Jews spoke out of turn by the water when he struck the rock, only because again they touched a raw nerve in him. The way they spoke, same thing over here. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu spoke out of turn. We find by the Meraglim, Hashem originally said, the land that you're going to, it's Arizona's Chomudosh, land, milk and honey. The enemy's going to fall before you, nothing to worry about. And it says explicitly, if not for the Chet Meraglim, they would have taken over Canaan. As they walked in, like Yericho fell, all Canaan would have fallen. But because they failed with the Meraglim, therefore there was more of a conventional war. The conquest was more conventional. It wasn't so simple. Now the question is, they come to Moshe Rabbeinu and says, we'd like to send Meraglim, we'd like to send scouts. The question is, Moshe should have vetoed it immediately. He should have reprimanded them, and Moshe Rabbeinu knew how to reprimand. When it came to Chil Hashem, he knew how to reprimand. So he should have reacted to it. Why didn't he react? And say, under no circumstance are you sending Meraglim. He understood where it was going. So the Medrash tells us, Moshe Rabbeinu had one weakness. What was the weakness? And they knew exactly how to play Moshe Rabbeinu. When they came and they requested the Meraglim, when it came to a question of Chil Hashem, and Moshe Rabbeinu heard the word Chil Hashem, immediately became blindsided. Why? Because this is what they said to him. You know why we would send spies? Not Chas v'Shalom, we're questioning Hashem. Because Hashem said that when we come to Canaan, we're going to find Batim Leim Kol Tuv. The houses are going to be filled with wealth. Wealth. Said to Moshe Rabbeinu, don't you think when we go there, the Canaanites, they're going to bury all their wealth? We're going to come into the houses. We're not going to locate wealth. You know what's going to be? It's a Chil Hashem. Therefore, we want to send spies to see exactly where they're hiding all the treasure, so we come in to prevent the Chil Hashem. This is explicit in the Midrash. Hear this? They knew exactly how to present it to Moshe Rabbeinu. You speak the Chil Hashem card, you have him immediately. You have him hoodwinked. And that's what they did. And Moshe, Chil Hashem, if that's the reason why you're doing it, send spies. Send scouts. It wasn't questioning God that you have the ability to conquer or not conquer. That's what it was all about. Over here, things getting worse rather than better. If does not be like calling it, since you've come, they've gotten worse. Moshe Rabbeinu proved he was what? He was the Goel. He performed miracles. But they said, since you've come, things, it's Chil Hashem. Look, does not Virma saying that what God is saying as a Goel, this is disastrous. So who's that claim against? It's Chil Hashem. Once Moshe Rabbeinu heard Chil Hashem, Moshe Rabbeinu lost his cool. And as a result of that, he spoke out of turn. And he used the wrong term rather than said, Hashem explained it to me. He used the Lama Ro'os Lama Zeh. Because he spoke the same terminology as Dasam Avira. They were saying, this is what it's all about. Look what you brought. You brought disaster upon it. That's here also. So the Chil Hashem, that's what he's pained with. And Moshe Rabbeinu, soul essence represented that. Therefore, that's the reason why he spoke out of turn. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Let's see the halacha.